Okay, they added that. That's new. So we'll start the session now. As I said, I would like to welcome you tonight to our discussion on guaranteed livable income, hosted by New Brunswick Southwest Greens. My name is John Reist. We want to acknowledge that we are here on the traditional unceded territory of the Passamaquoddy people, covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, and we are grateful for their welcome and friendship. The Green Party of Canada has promoted the idea of guaranteed livable income as a way to end poverty and has made it an issue during the past elections. Basic income as an idea has been around for a long time, and it may finally become a reality with many countries around the world starting pilot and experimental programs. With the event of COVID-19, income security has become an issue, and basic income is being mentioned now also by the NDP and the Liberal parties. On February 22nd, Member of Parliament Jenica Atwin introduced a bill to C-273, which is our first ever bill towards a national guaranteed income. I've asked Jenica Atwin, Member of Parliament for Fredericton, to speak to us tonight about guaranteed livable income. And following, there will be a discussion. Following the discussion, you will be able to ask questions and comments. Jenica, I welcome you to and ask you to speak. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And I'll just start with a warning. You might hear my little one here and there, but that's okay. It's working from home in these times. So just thank you very much. And I'm Jenica, and my team member Robert's also here with me tonight. And I would just like to acknowledge as well that I speak on the unceded Willis-Toggellic territory. I'm actually in Willamuggadug, a good place to fish. So very honored to live, to work and learn in this place. And I think I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the devastating news that we received as Canadians across this country with the discovery of 215 children's remains at the Kamloops residential school former site. I've made a call to action that all sites be searched, and with a particular emphasis on Shubenacadie because of East Coast, and most of the children would have been sent there from our local communities. So just to put that out there, and it's a really heavy time. So if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask, and maybe after our discussion tonight, or send them my way, I'd be happy to talk with you about what you might be feeling, or if you just have questions, or if you'd like to learn, to be pointed to resources. It's my passion, and I would absolutely be honored to do that. So thank you, John, so much for the invitation to come and speak tonight. And I'll give the disclaimer that I'm not an economist. I'm an everyday Canadian who, from working in education, I really saw the intersections of so many aspects of our society and some of the ways that the system fails. And then certainly, being involved in politics and having discussions with my fellow community members and learning about some of the really difficult situations that people find themselves in. And in some cases, there's an answer, there's a place we can refer, there's a way we can work through it. And sometimes the answer just seems like it's out of our grasp. And when I was introduced to the concept of guaranteed livable income, I was so excited by the possibility, by the opportunity that it presents. And really, I keep talking about it like it's a collective sigh of relief for so many Canadians across the country. And I really believe that's what it would do. Certainly it's in its early stages of what it would look like on the ground, but there have been pilots, there are models we can look at and discuss. There is a bill, a government bill before Parliament, which we can discuss as well. And there's been lots of terms as well. There's a UBI, GLI. What the Greens like to use is the guaranteed livable income. And so I'll give a bit of an explainer on what that is, how it might be a little bit different from the basic income guarantee, and even in some ways how I feel that MP Dirkwitz's bill falls a little bit short, but that's what we're here to do, is to work towards its improvement. And hopefully when it comes to the amendment stage, we can get it a little more solid to pick up the slack of the patchwork system that we currently have. So as well, I'll be speaking in English tonight, but if anyone has questions in French, please feel free to communicate in the language of your choice, and I'll answer that in French as well. And so, yeah, I mean, also just honoring residential schools. There's, Green Party, we're known as climate activists. We're known as those fighting for the environment. So why all the fuss about a GLI? Why talk about social and economic policy in this way? And for me, it's because it all connects. And I think about the lifestyle change that's required for the ways that we need to achieve our climate goals, and to keep the temperature rise low, and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And it takes a real conscious effort. And it's really difficult for some of us to make that conscious effort when we're in a perpetual state of survival, constantly under stress. And financial stress is wreaking havoc in our communities, in our families, in our neighborhoods. And so it's a very big concern for me. And so I really see GLI as well as a big step we can take towards our other goals, including climate goals, including relationship with Indigenous peoples. In fact, it was a recommendation as part of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report, with a focus on domestic violence, and how many individuals who find themselves in that situation cannot leave because of the financial burden. I'm not knowing if they have that security, I'm not knowing if they'll have housing. And many people will stay in abusive situations. So just, we can give so many specific examples like that. And so I'm hoping that's where our discussion will lead tonight, is really painting a picture that this is a very human response to so many of our human problems in society. And again, just being a member of parliament for just under 2 years now, what I've been experiencing, daily difficult phone calls, and I would love to be able to have the answer to so many of those issues that we face. And I'm sure my team would as well, but it's something, again, that could help Canadians across the country. So the big thing, I'm going to pull up a document here that was prepared by my team member, Paul Manley. So he's been just so great. He's very passionate about this as well. And he's our economic policy guy, and Elizabeth is our finance critic. So this is something that's kind of a team effort. We all have our portfolios, but this is one that really we like to intersect on, because again, it just touches so many important topics and conversations and issues. So as far as, what is a GLI? And so it's an emergency guaranteed livable income. So we use those terms very specific. And it can be set up to automatically make a payment to every Canadian with a social insurance number, with the requirement that those who do not need the emergency payment would opt out. So it's like negative billing. Those that don't need the payment and don't opt out would have it taxed back by the CRA in the next tax season. So a few of the ways that it's different, we really believe in it being based on, territorial, market basket measures would be an example of how you might do that. It's based on cost of living. So we saw with the CERB, for example, $2,000 across the country. Very different felt here in New Brunswick than it would be, say, in British Columbia. So those are just some of the things that went into the conversation around, which type of model that we would like to endorse more specifically. And so that's why guaranteed livable income is really what's attractive to our caucus. So here's a more general idea of how GLI could work. And I can put links in our chat as well that you can do some extra reading. There's some incredible reports that are out right now, including the PBO report, so the Parliamentary Budget Officer, which gives you the really, the financial, the numbers, and it really helps you understand how we might pay for this, because that's the question I get asked all the time. Is it sounds great, but how are we going to pay for it? And that's an important question to ask. And so it's really nice to see that, there's been a lot of work done in that area to really crunch the numbers. So the GLI would replace federal transfers for social assistance, so welfare, disability supports, the old age supplement, the guaranteed income supplement, the Canadian child tax benefit, the working income tax benefit, all of which are very GL-like in nature. So this is not also, completely revolutionary. So sometimes there's criticisms or conversations. I've heard people say, socialism, you're going down that path too far, or that, I don't believe in paying for someone who's not working, these kinds of things. And then I'll kind of come back with, well, do you support maternity leave, or do you support, fishing season, what do we do for unemployment? Say for our fishers as an example. So we've already in the system in this way, but again, we have a patchwork. So this is about taking that patchwork and streamlining it, which is a way for cost savings. And it also puts a lot more, less administration, and there's more of a burden on CRA to be involved in what that would look like rolling out and ensuring that those who don't need it aren't getting it. I know that's a concern we hear a lot with the CERB discussion as well. So the GLI would not impact employment insurance, the Canadian pension plan, childcare subsidies, social housing, drug benefits, or dental care. So the idea is not to eliminate other safety nets or ground floors. It's to just complete the suite in a really streamlined way. Once started, the biggest challenge in implementing a GLI would be jurisdictional. So as we know, we would have to get all levels of government on board to work together on this initiative. In particular, provincial governments would have to use their authority in some areas that become support to collapse programs or to integrate them into a single program. So, I mean, really it's helping at all levels. Total federal provincial spending on income support in Canada reached $185 billion in 2013, which is equal to 1/10 of our GDP. To ensure political, multi-jurisdictional coherence, a GLI would be an early agenda item for the Council of Canadian Governments. So this is an idea that comes out of our Green Platform. So we called for the creation of this council that would bring federal, provincial, territorial, municipal, and local governments, First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples around the table to set national goals. And we can also look to that for the conversation around pharmacare, for example. We know we need provinces and territories on board as well. So the council is a piece of this puzzle that we're also advocating for. So as I mentioned, there is an enormous and persuasive amount of research that already exists that demonstrates that the multiplicity of income support programs, overlapping, confusing, riddled with perverse incentives in a large way, is a huge problem. Some of our supplements, some of our income support programs are basically legislating poverty, and they make it really difficult for people to come out of them once you're in. And there are clawbacks. It's again, streamlining. I think it would be better for everyone, including the bureaucrats who will be implementing the system. So to get an idea, it would replace separate federal and provincial programs with a single, universal, unconditional cash benefit delivered through the tax system, as I mentioned. I will also be the first to admit that the CRA is not perfect. Our tax system is not perfect. I can tell you from dealing with again, issues with constituents and having to go through that program, we need to make some improvements there as well, but just to kind of put that caveat there for now. So establishing the base amount would depend on the measure of poverty use. So this is the piece that makes it the livable income that's based on where you live in Canada. The living wage measurement will be one way to determine the amount. I mentioned the market basket measure as well. So different regions would have different costs of living and would therefore have a different living wage and a different GLI calculation. And some argue that this may make administration more costly, but I think, at the outset, you'd have to do some work, but it should, be relatively smooth once that's determined. So where am I at here? The Green Party recommends using the OECD's low income measure that has been adopted by Ontario. There was also an Ontario pilot for GLI. So again, there's lots to draw from. And there's a note here that about 1/3 of Canadians have a yearly income lower than $20,000. Money earned above the minimum GLI level would be taxed back gradually, and benefits like free dental care or prescription drugs for low income Canadians would continue, as I mentioned. So the simplest way to begin the transition to a GLI and to put more income into the hands of the poorest Canadians would be for the federal government to make all tax credits refundable. This would impact the personal credit, the spousal credit, the caregiver credit, as well as some deductions like the childcare expenses deduction, which would be converted to a credit. In this connection, it should be noted that there has been some useful but limited federal-provincial coordination in select areas in recent years, but at least it's something to draw from, such as the consolidation of the hodgepodge of tax credits, sales, property, energy into a more effective monthly payment delivered quarterly. So again, this is an Ontario example. But so much more action needs to occur. So it's nice again to see that these steps are being taken, but we really want to see a concerted effort. Bipartisan support would be nice as well. I really think this is key to our pandemic response and recovery. So much of the conversation has been around even unpaid labor, how it's impacted women, how women are leaving the workforce. So there's just, again, so many threads that go into this conversation. So many people think, what's the threshold? And again, that would be determined on where you live in Canada. So it would be, the introduction would be a regular minimum payment to every eligible Canadian adult and child. The payment would not be clawed back, as I mentioned, but gradually, as a recipient earned additional income in such ways as to be phased out completely once an upper threshold of income would be reached. So $60,000 would be perhaps an example here in New Brunswick. The overall cost of the program itself would depend on the rate of reduction as recipients' employment income increased to the upper threshold. So again, the key is, I know there's lots of conversation around labor market, encouraging people to work. If you're just getting, money to stay home, why would you keep going? Of course, individuals are going to have different reasons and different motivations, but really the idea is the system is supposed to be designed to encourage people to work, to follow their dreams. For example, if I can be, very optimistic and utopian, I feel artists, I think anyone in the gig economy, I think, there's so many examples of who this could help. You can take risks. You can maybe change a business idea, become an entrepreneur. I think of parents with young children. I think of those that take care of their maybe aging family members. So there's just so many, again, examples of how this could really help across our communities. So I mean, that's a lot of talking from me, and I've got, again, lots of things we can pull from and talk about. So maybe if we wanted to open up to comments or questions, I'd love to do that. Oh, you're on mute there, John. Classic Zoom.
There we go. Okay. I'd like to thank you, Jenica. That was quick. I know that there are viewers who are involved tonight that are involved with the community. I would first ask what they feel about guaranteed livable income and how it would affect their community. Xander, you are involved with housing, and how do you feel that this would work, solve problems with housing?
Hi, John, and hi, Jenica, and everybody else. Thank you, Jenica, for speaking to this and for working on behalf of all Canadians. So yeah, I do a lot of work in housing. I'm a urban planner in not the most urban area, in rural part of New Brunswick, down in St. Stephen and Charlotte County, and we have just as many housing problems here as cities, and in some ways it's almost harder. And the more I work in housing, the more I see it's less about housing and it's more about income. And you can see why in previous generations, income levels were high enough that the cost of housing was in reach for most people. There was a real middle class, and there's a number of factors that have led to it, but it's really lack of income, and I think that's one of the biggest factors in people not being able to obtain housing. And Jenica, you mentioned people staying in bad situations because they won't have a roof over their head. And so we do have this patchwork of social safety net systems, and housing supports are one of them, and social housing, social development in New Brunswick it meets some needs, but I think I don't know if it would solve everything in terms of housing, but I think it would greatly expand the demographic of people who could obtain housing in the market. And the last thing I'll say is I work closely with municipalities, and they're realizing like they basically have to become developers because they have land and nobody else is doing it. And there's no incentive to build affordable housing. CMHC provides some incentives, but there's a lot of hurdles. There's no guarantees, and the federal government is not building housing anymore. They're providing some carrot to the private market to do it at affordable levels, but that shouldn't have to be the case. The case should just be that the market will be able to provide for everybody, because there isn't such a huge gap between what's considered affordable housing and luxury housing, because everybody there's less of a wealth gap. So that's all I'll say. I think the more I look at housing and a lot of social issues, universal basic income, guaranteed livable income. It's the closest thing I've seen to like a silver bullet solution. So I'm really glad there's people in Ottawa working to make it happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Is there anybody else?
Can I just respond to that?
Yes.
Thanks. So, I mean, thank you so much, Alex. And I mean, the silver bullet, I think that's really how I think about it as well. And I know it's not going to fix every problem. And you're right. Again, housing is still going to be an issue, especially affordable housing. But again, it applies in so many situations where there isn't an answer currently. So that's really how I feel about it as well. But we couldn't abandon every other program as well. So I also had a really intense conversation recently with an advocate in the Fredericton area for the homeless and for housing. And we still need wraparound supports. We'll still need that. And, there's the conversation we saw, the thread around, CERB and how maybe some people would take it and take advantage of it, or that it may go to substance abuse and addiction. And that's still going to happen. But I think that's going to happen in general in our society. But if we can help people along the way and save people along the way, it's worth it to try. And so if we do a pro and con list and a good and bad, my goodness, the good certainly outweighs any bad that I can come up with, and that in the lengthy discussions that we've had around this. So I really do think it is, again, that kind of silver bullet solution, and it's worth a shot. And there's an organization in New Brunswick, they're the concerned citizens of New Brunswick, and they were calling on maybe having our province be another pilot, say if anything to bring it to our citizens faster, then let's do it. And certainly I would be waving the flag for New Brunswick to be the first one, because we certainly need it. I think many of our provinces in the Atlantic are just at a lower threshold for income in general, less opportunity, and again, there's a lot of seasonal work, there's a lot of gig economy work. So I just think that we could show the rest of Canada how well it would work, and let us be the guinea pigs. Just roll out that program. Oh, you're on Zoom again, or mute again. Zoom again.
Okay, thank you, Jenica. Is there anybody else?
There's a question in the chat. How does GLI compare with the GIS that seniors get now?
That is an excellent question, and it's very similar, but it would be more. It would be more, and that's the key with a lot of the benefits that exist are great, and they were designed with a really important purpose, but we need more. People need more money. So yeah, that's a really simple answer for that one, but it's certainly a little bit more complicated. But that would be my kind of short response.
So will GIS be replaced by guaranteed income, or it would be on top?
Yes. No, it would be replaced. Yeah, it would be part of the patchwork that would be taken up.
Right.
Anyone else have a question?
Or a comment?
Or comment? How about you, Brandon? You always have something to say. Oh, Joel?
Yeah, you just mentioned earlier, I kind of followed guaranteed income stuff for a amount, but the part I hadn't heard recently was about the idea of trying to get a lot of the other tax credits to be refundable. Is there any more specifics you could give us on that?
So I mean, it just goes into it's in the costing of it. It's in how it will be administered. So I think what I'll do is I can try to find a document that would maybe illustrate that better. There's some great graphics as well. It's just, again, it's kind of the approach to the whole system, rather than kind of putting people with onerous criteria, the squeeze of the system, a lot of the red tape. It's meant to eliminate a lot of that. So that's kind of the basic idea behind it. I'm going to put this graphic in because I think it does a good job of answering that. So it's from Citizens for Public Justice.
Do you have a share screen on yours?
Oh, I'm just going to put it in there. I don't know if I can share the screen. Yeah, so what it does is it compares the different systems, our current one to what we're kind of imagining, with some great graphics.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I will. That's in the chat if you want the link, and I will be sending out an email later with all the information that's gathered.
something we haven't mentioned as well is just how, the work is changing right now. It certainly is accelerated because of the pandemic, the way that work is changing. But when we're thinking about automation, that's really, I think, the earliest time that I started to hear about a GLI and what it would look like and how it might be necessary. The more we move towards automation in the workplace. I think it was Elon Musk was even talking about it. Even Chrystia Freeland, so our current finance minister, she gave a famous TED talk where she's talking about this as well. So it's part of this shift that we're seeing in our society. That again, it may be necessary. So it's exciting to see that we're talking about it now. I feel it's necessary now, but it's only going to become more urgent and more necessary as we continue down this path. So there's lots of interesting, articles around that as well.
Yes, I know that with automation in industry, that's going to be a problem, and a lot of people are going to be losing their jobs. And we have transportation. We have trucks that are going to be built that will be autonomous and will be drive themselves. So a lot of truck drivers will be losing their jobs. So I would like you to go and raise your hand if you have a question. And I have Graham Neal. Graham has put up his hand. So Graham.
Hello. Hi, Jenica. I currently am in a bad situation simply because I cannot pay all my bills on my government income. And it's a real disaster. My total income is $1,445 a month. My fixed costs are between $1,100 and $1,200. So how do I live?
Well, nice to see you, Graham. And exactly, that's the whole, that's the whole conversation in a nutshell right there. And the answer is, we can't wait really for a GLI either. It's so frustrating, and the urgency has been there, as I said, for such a long time. But it's just an example. It's like legislating to live below the poverty line, below what you need for your necessities, for you to have that cushion as well. We need to even go beyond that. People want to be able to buy gifts for their family if they want to, or there's all these things we can talk about in our community that if we had a little bit more. I really feel, that happiness. I mean, that was actually, it was measured happiness in the Ontario pilot. It did increase, so we're talking about mental health impacts as well. Just again, stress, when you're under, such an intense period of stress, you can't retain new information. For example, it's detrimental to your health.
I'll see, I have another issue, which is, I am a workers' comp claimant who has gone past 65 years old, so that I received a settlement, which is 10% of whatever I earned from workers' comp less the first 24 months. For me, it's $193 a month. Because I had to take it as an annuity here in New Brunswick. Anything over 7,500 has to be taken as an annuity. So I'm doing that, but the problem is that it's being deducted off my guaranteed income supplement. So 150 of the 193 is being deducted. This just really doesn't make any sense. And I'm trying to live. I get this settlement, and it's worthless to me because it's being basically taxed back. Any idea?
Well, it just again highlights exactly what we're talking about, the clawbacks. So actually, Graham, what I would like to do is take that specific example as well. So we write letters to ministers all the time, urging across the board support for a GLI as an example, but this highlights there's an issue. And so, again, in the meantime, I can push on that specifically while still advocating for the GLI, but there's so many examples of that. And you're right, it makes no sense whatsoever.
Thank you.
Anne, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Jenica. I joined late, so I may have missed a lot of the explanation about exactly how it's going to work, and I was wondering if you didn't mind kind of going through it again, because I heard something about a threshold income. And I was also wondering what the rationale was not to just to pay the regional amount to everyone equally and then tax it back from those who didn't need it, which maybe, I'm wondering why that, that seems simpler, but would it be as fair, or would it be a waste of effort? Or I guess I need to know what the parameters are, and then why simply paying it to everyone and then taxing it back from those who didn't need it wouldn't be a more efficient or fairer situation.
Absolutely. Yes. No, thank you. So, and that's exactly the idea. So it's automatic payment to every Canadian with a social insurance number, but with the requirement that those who don't need it, they can opt out. So like negative billing, and those that don't need the payment and don't opt out, they would have it taxed back by the CRA in the next tax season. And so it's also, again, it's replacing federal transfers for social assistance, disability supports, old age supplement, guaranteed income supplement. So it's taking all of these that exist and putting it into one. And again, just rolling it out, guaranteed. And when we mentioned that threshold, it would be based on the jurisdiction. So that's why we call it the guaranteed livable income and not just the basic universal income, because it's really looking at the different indexes depending on where you are in Canada. And I mentioned 60,000 as an example of a potential New Brunswick threshold. Once you were making that, you wouldn't get any more from a guaranteed livable income. So there's lots of different ways to do it, but that's the way that we kind of envision from our perspective.
Thank you. That clears it up.
Sure. Yeah. And like I said, I'll share all of these, the information that I have as well, just so we can kind of lay it out.
Would a guaranteed livable income cause a leakage of jobs to jurisdictions in which people are willing or forced to work for less?
That's a really good question. And hi, Tom. So, I mean,
yes.
We really hope that it's going to, actually empower workers, that it's going to, lead to better wages, that it's going to lead to benefits, incentives. And so, I mean, it's possible that there would be some unintended consequences, but the goal is to lift everyone up. So as far as, a leakage of jobs to jurisdictions where people are willing to work for less, there's lots of situations in our communities where we see some of that happening. But I think this is trying to address it in some way. So, even think about, say, our temporary migrant workers in the system that we have here in New Brunswick, and that would have to be worked out as well. But it's just talking about the basic, rights and what we should have as far as a wage. And, we see a lot around $15 minimum wage. Federally, that's what we ran on actually, but there are studies that's not a livable income. So, I mean, this is time for reimagining how we value people, especially workers, especially essential workers. And this is long overdue for sure. So there would be lots of work to do, but that's certainly not the intention, is to have people, leave for, forced to work for less.
David Kersey, you have your hand up.
Yes, okay, I am off mute. That's good. Yeah, this is more of a comment, and I think it's kind of more political how we position ourselves. I've been following the Finland experiment. Finland a few years ago started a pilot, and I thought Finland, well, that's a country that would make it work. They make everything work, it seems. But it's been rejected, and I looked into it to try to find out. It wasn't rejected because it was unsuccessful. I think it was politics. Just a little bit of background. It was mainly initiated by the Green Party and the Center Party, which is the Farmers' Party in Finland. So those two parties, I think, have avoided playing the left-right game that's so powerful in our country. It's powerful there in Finland too. It seems to be powerful everywhere. So because the Greens and the Farmers' Party don't really play that game, they do more of a, instead of left-right, more of a positive negative spectrum. And of course, this is positive, and it was successful. The Social Democrats, which is equivalent to our NDP, the Labor Party, which is the biggest, I think is the party in government, of course, with a coalition. They always have to have coalitions under proportional representation. But the Social Democrats and the far right party were against it. Here again, the left-right thing has scuttled it. And it seems to me the Social Democrats, because they represent the civil servants, and the civil servants, bureaucrats, were very uncomfortable with this because they saw it as a lot of job loss. Because of the welfare, unemployment insurance, that is a huge industry for the civil service. And they saw job losses because it was going to be so simple, it was going to be simplified, done through the tax system. So they were against it, and therefore the Social Democrats, the governing party, backed up by in a coalition, were against it. And then the extreme right, of course, that's the usual right wing who says it's, you know, it's going to destroy incentive and all that. So I think there's a lesson there that this could die because of extreme left and right wing. And I'm not sure if our NDP are for it. Jenica might talk about that. But I've heard rumblings amongst the civil service, even here, that it wouldn't be good. There'd be a lot of job losses. So maybe the NDP will kind of go on that track and protect them. But anyway, I'll let Jenica answer that, what her feeling is on the political spectrum and what the NDP is saying.
Or anything. I mean, that's a great question. And, you know, we need, again, the bipartisan support for this to really make the difference that we hope it will. You know, motion 46, Leah Gazan. So there's certainly support with her and her team, and many of her NDP colleagues really rallied around her. There has been some vagueness, I think, on the part of official party policy, but from what I'm seeing with colleagues in the House, very much in support. And then there's, you know, strong voices within the Liberal caucus as well. I'm thinking of Nathaniel Erskine Smith, many of his fellow MPs as well. There's, you know, and I'm not sure about the bloc. We'd have to be very respectful of jurisdiction for Quebec, but I think that, you know, many could be persuaded as well. So it would be kind of it would take some negotiating. It would take a concerted effort, but I think I'm optimistic. I think it'll be okay. And there's some conservatives as well that would, you know, be behind it. I think for me, it would be how we discuss it. If we go for the cost savings, you know, we can make a lot of arguments in healthcare, for example, and in social programming, some of the savings that can be made. And so that's a conversation around fiscal responsibility that, you know, my conservative friends will hopefully agree with as well. So it's about you know, pitching it the way that it needs to be pitched, being really transparent, talking about the numbers and the realities, and also being willing to admit failure. So say if we try it, and if it doesn't work, if it costs jobs, if it costs us more than we had intended, if it doesn't work, then we pull it back, you know. But I think right now we got to be bold, and this is the time. We you know, never let a good crisis go to waste. It's almost an overused saying at this point, but I would love to see us just try. And again, if it doesn't work, I'll be the first person to say, okay, let's go back to what we had, but let's just try it for sure. So yeah, I think it's going to take some work, David, but I have hope that we can get some cross-partisan support.
Well, Jenica, I've been keeping an eye on the news, and the isn't the NDP starting to co-op basic income and take it for their own?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that happening. We see that sometimes, but you know what? Whoever takes the credit, as long as it happens. That's kind of been my point of view.
We came up with the idea. Elizabeth May campaigned on it in 2014. The NDP didn't mention it. And now I'm starting to see people in the NDP and Mr. Singh getting out there and talking about it. So maybe we'll have the partisan support.
Well, and and even to see the government bill. Oh, sorry, yes. David. Yeah.
No, can finish.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. It was. I believe this was originally a conservative idea in this country. Hugh Siegel, who was a progressive, very progressive
Mhm.
conservative from Ontario. So I think that kind of wing of the party would be for it, the progressives, but forget the reformers out west. They're totally, initiative and
Mhm.
individualism, and everyone has to stand on their own. So I think would be some room on the progressive conservatives, liberals, yeah, across the board.
Well, with Manitoba, they had a program that they had with the NDP, and it was very successful until the conservative government went and canceled it.
Yeah, and that's where Leah Gazan, she's the Winnipeg Center MP, so a lot of support in
Yes.
her neck of the woods as well in Manitoba. And just about the MP Dirkowitz's bill, so Bill C 273.
Mhm.
So just our position again is that it's not quite perfect, but we'll work to hopefully make it to closer to what we're advocating for. So basically, it's that the bill gives the minister 2 years to report back to Parliament with strategies to assess implementation models, and then another 2 years to report on the results of the strategies' actual implementation. So there's no firm requirement to actually implement this strategy after that 4-year period. And basically our position is that we don't necessarily need more studies, we need more action. There's again, lots of research, there's models we can look to. So it's kind of it's a baby step and we really need to take large leaps here. So that will be our biggest criticism of it. But just again, great to see that come from the Liberal side was, okay, here we go. It really kind of raised my hopes.
A question with that bill. Is there a timetable when it will be presented or passed?
That's a really good question. And my parliamentary assistants would laugh because sometimes we find out, 45 minutes how the day is going to change and what's going to be brought forward. So we really have no idea. I mean, I hate to be pessimistic, but I doubt it's going to come before the end of the session before the summer break. Hopefully back in the fall if there's not a federal election. But that's what we have to work with right now.
Well, if not, it'll be a election issue in the next election.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I know there is emails that are coming up through with petitions. So sending email petition to your local MLA. So I don't know if you haven't seen that. I'll go and send a link to everyone, and if you would go and reply which will send an email to John Williamson, which is our MP, telling him that you want it to be passed. Okay, starting to Garth Hood, you have your hand up.
Sorry, I just need to push all the right buttons. I'm mostly going to comment, but maybe there'll be some questions that come out of it. I'm going to point this out, Jenna, because I think there's things because I'm a big advocate and I've been having lots of discussions with people. And when things like the costs come up, I think we need to point out to people that poverty now is a cost, and we need to put some numbers on that. The Food Bank Ontario did a study of the cost of poverty in Canada in 2008. And from all the things they could account, they came up with 72.5 to 86.1 billion over 10 years ago. So we need those numbers for now, because if it's 150 billion, basic income is actually going to save us money, because the PBO says that it's going to cost 86.6 billion. And that's before we consider the programs that we can take money away from. There's 32 billion we already pay in programs. And so he estimated 43.1 billion as the net cost, and that doesn't consider any provincial programs. So there's provincial programs that he didn't even consider. So when you start looking at these numbers, it very quickly you start realizing, oh, It actually is very likely to cost less. And then we also have the UBI Works report that actually shows that it'll put 40 or 50 billion dollars into the economy after we pay for it 20 years from now. So it's really only an investment. And when we're talking, especially with conservatives, we should be talking in that business language. This investments work for business, so of course they must work for people too. You know, because poverty now is a cost, it's a drain on our economy. We can't buy the ideology that poverty is free. It's not. And we really need to push back against people, and we need to push back against the lazy comments. I want to know how many there are out there. Is there 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000? And if we're helping 999 people because of one lazy person, who cares? Just who cares, period. Because all the bureaucracy goes away. And so we're saving a huge amount of money by not worrying about the one person who's lazy. And we so fixate on those people instead of the other 99 or 999 who could be helped and really want to make their lives better and want to contribute. And to be honest, I even think the person in their mom's basement playing video games does want to contribute. They just don't know yet because they don't have opportunity. So I think we've got to have faith in people, or we're going to go down the rabbit hole of not having faith in people. And we can't, I just don't think we can afford it. And the other thing I think especially with the Green Party, we've got to remember that we will not be able to transition without supports for people. We, period, will not be able to do that. And so if we care about a carbon reduction and moving to a net zero economy, we should be moving into Alberta and providing the supports for them first. We should be providing really good basic income in Alberta. We should be lobbying the Alberta government and saying, you know, the two decisions that came out this week are basically the last nails in the coffin for the oil and gas industry. We have investors pulling out, and we have court cases now going against oil and gas. So if Alberta was smart, it would be engaging in a conversation of getting a lot of money for basic income, a lot of money for renewable energy, not what they're doing, which is locking themselves into a boom bust economy, which is now going bust. So I just think we need to up our game on this stuff. And Jenica, I would appeal to you, if we can get some 2021 numbers on what the actual cost of poverty is, if there's a way to get research on that, it would be really amazing. And the other thing is to actually get some numbers on how many people, because we have basic income research, and it shows that people work about the same, right? But what it doesn't show is that lots of those people are taking care of children, they're taking care of elderly people. In the Manitoba study, a whole cohort of grade 12 students didn't go to school and went back to high school. So those are numbers that don't get captured in people that are actually making their lives better. And the other thing I would appeal to is if we do a major Canadian pilot, if we cut it short, we're not going to see the results of all those people rebuilding their lives. And that's the person that mentioned the Finnish example. I would say that was the biggest problem. It was cut short. All the people rebuilding their lives were just let down and shoved back into a welfare system, and they weren't actually able to re-engage to become productive members of society because they were still healing themselves. And so if you don't, it'll probably take a generation, to be honest, to actually rebuild people living in poverty to get back to that point. Anyways, I don't want to go on too long, but I just think we need to, there's more research that we need. We need some of these numbers, because then the naysayers can't just say, oh, it costs too much. We can say, well, we spend, in 2021, we spent $150 billion on poverty. It makes the argument go away. And also the lazy people argument. It'd be nice to have those numbers and to quantify, is it 1%, 2%, 5%? Because I doubt it's more than that. And also bring out the examples of the people that are re-educating and how long that will take. the people that are caregiving, because we have a old age home crisis in New Brunswick.
Yep.
People being willing to, maybe we could, with basic income, we could create a volunteer model. Maybe small rural communities could then create a volunteer model for taking care of people, because people no longer need to rely on the system to give them the money. The money comes anyways, and if they get a little bit extra, it's perk, you know? So I just think we need a few more numbers. Like, that's what I would encourage you,
Yeah.
Jenica, if you can see if there's a way to get a few more of these numbers to counter some of the false negative narratives.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much, Garth. And I mean, those numbers do exist. I mean, no, we wouldn't have 2020 as a snapshot yet, but certainly 2021, I mean. But Russell Garrison, he's an NDP colleague, and he gave some incredible stats during one of our late night debates recently, and it was like healthcare costs that and it was social, programming costs, and it was cost of poverty. I'm not sure which kind of time frame he was looking at, but absolutely it was powerful, right? It's just kind of, this is what we're already paying. What's the cost of doing nothing? What's the cost of status quo? And so actually our team is going to be preparing some graphics as well to put some of these things out, and for people to have that language and those numbers to work with. But you're absolutely right, and on every point for sure.
Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, and Garth, I agree with you. Like, I'm actually interested in food security, and I'm trying to prepare a talk on that. And then to say there's a lot of farmland that is not being used anymore, because farmers cannot afford, people cannot afford to go and be in agriculture. And if we have a guaranteed income, people can go and take that option and become we could have people going into farming and producing local food.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I really like the emphasis you put on volunteerism as well, because we know there's also ton of other spin-offs of good that comes from volunteering. But right now we've seen volunteerism just drop off because people, again, are too stressed, or they can't, or they're not in the position to do it, or they've left the workforce. And so that's a huge piece that I'd like to, advocating around that as well. So this is why we have these discussions, is to kind of pinpoint.
Yeah.
I suspect from you could probably get in contact someone with the Manitoba study. They did a lot of quantification of what people did what. And it would be really nice to just get a breakdown, because when people say people work about the same, and then people kind of say, well, that means there's still a whole bunch. That means, I think what people then think is those other 50% are the lazy people, right? That's what goes on in their head. Whereas if you have the numbers that said, yeah, but 20% of them were taking care of children, and 5% of them were taking care of elderly. And, if you could actually break that down and have the numbers, it would really change people's perspective to realize how few are just going to twiddle their thumbs and do nothing. But to be honest, I don't even care, because I think those people are also figuring their lives out. And the other one maybe to quantify is, some people get really upset because they think that people are just going to use the money for drug addictions, which there's no evidence to that. And the other thing is that the stable income is the super important part of it.
Right.
It's addictions are fueled by an unstable income, money going up and down, but they're actually reduced when you fix it, and it becomes stable, because then people can make good choices.
Absolutely. I think there's so Alex shared in the chat a little bit about the Ontario pilot, and there was examples specifically where people were coming out of addiction and substance abuse as well, because it was just an opportunity to kind of collect yourself and get your life together, and to, to think about what the next steps are, rather than, again, that perpetual kind of survival mode that you would be in. That Jesse Gollum piece is really powerful.
Yeah, and her photos are pretty fun. If people want to do anything, start sharing her photos on social media, because they're very powerful.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anne, did you have another one?
Well, actually, Brian Lowry is next.
Sure. Hey, Brian.
I'm not trying to jump the queue, and hopefully I'm not muted. So I do that all the time. I hate the lazy narrative, because the laziest people in the country, and we all know it, are extremely wealthy people. Not all of them, certainly,
Yes.
but there are an awful lot of very, very lazy, extremely wealthy people. And so the idea that poor people are lazier is just hogwash. I mean, of course, there's
Yes.
lazy poor people,
Yes.
just like they're lazy every group. I'm a university professor, so full disclosure, we're viewed as lazy by people who don't know what we do. And yes, there are lazy university professors. I'd like to think I'm not one of them. On the conservative side of things, and definitely on the farming side of things, I'm a bit troubled by making the amount of money regional. And the reason is, it would be great if we could get more people moving to New Brunswick, especially if the federal government was giving them a basic living income. And one way to do that is, it's ridiculously inexpensive to live here compared to, say, all of Southern Ontario. And my mom lives in not to discount Ontario, my mom lives in Ontario, in rural Northern Ontario, and there's a town near her that's slowly dying. If there was a basic income and it wasn't dependent on whether you live near, to the south of North Bay or in the Toronto area, then her area would be reinvigorated, because people would move there. It's a very nice area, and it's cheaper to live than Toronto. So I wouldn't discount that this could get people moving to rural areas, and that definitely skews conservative in most parts of Canada. And I think rural people would appreciate, most of them would appreciate an influx of people. Some of them probably have some hangups that I won't go into that might be discriminatory. But the other thing was, the other sort of conservative side to this is, I appreciate this, that the civil service doesn't want to see job losses in the civil service. But you can pivot some of these jobs with a basic income to enforcement. Conservatives love enforcement. And if you're going to set up a system that's more open to fraud, perhaps, then you can enforce. And rather than enforcing, the poor single mother with 3 children living on nothing, you might be enforcing, say, a university professor who is either collecting this improperly, claiming dependents they don't have, or maybe trying to claim 3 versions of this for themselves, by using pets or something. There's going to be fraud, and conservatives love enforcement. So if you could repurpose the civil servants to enforcement, then you kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Is a bad analogy, but also thank you for the letter on the 215 children. The note that was great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Sorry, there wasn't really a question.
I'd like to make a comment. I came across this afternoon. In 2016, the government introduced a tax bracket for high-income Canadians, which caused an outcry that wealthy people might be faced with a marginal tax rate approaching 50%. Yet, bizarrely, it is thought reasonable to claw back half of the earnings of those who cannot afford a single luxury. And this is something that has to change.
I think it was someone at a Liberal convention, so maybe I shouldn't say it here, but tax me more, please.
Yes.
There was a delegate at the Liberal convention who said that there are an awful lot of people, middle and upper middle class, who realize that they could be paying more in taxes and still live a comfortable life. Not people living in Toronto where it's absurdly expensive to live, maybe, but there are a lot of people across the country who are doing reasonably well, myself included.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to pay more taxes, but
yes.
I'm certainly, it's not universal, but it would be, I'm certainly not tax averse, and taxing poorer people is insane. I mean, there is room in the economy to tax middle class, upper middle class, and certainly the wealthy a lot more. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I was just gonna,
when I
sorry, John.
came out here and with the various elections that we had, I used chose the person I was voting for. I did not vote for any party that said had a tax credit or a tax break in their platform. I'm glad to pay taxes. Anyway.
Well, and that's another question sometimes people in the conversation about how will we pay for this, is there's, we do need tax reform. There's also tax havens. I know maybe Brandon might want to talk about that as well. But so it's just, there's subsidies that we give to corporations. There's lots of ways. I think the cost isn't the issue for me as well. But and Brian, that regional piece, that's really interesting. And I think it's important to have that conversation about what that looks like, and as far as,
Did we lose her?
Thunderstorm.
Yes.
Sorry, that was all I had.
Is it raining?
There's quite a thunderstorm moved
yes.
past Fredericton. I think
Yes.
it's on its way.
I don't know if she's going
to. I should have an answer from her in a second if she's having issues. So just bear with me here in a second.
Yes.
Cool. While you're waiting for, I did just want to make another note on Tom was talking about. Are people going to leave? Are we going to lose jobs if they go to a different region or something like that to get a better income? Yes, that could happen. But the other thing is, if you have a fairly stable income, guess what that means? Banks or financial institutions are going to be willing to give you money to invest in stuff. So say a company decides to pick up and move to another country. A bunch of workers get together, they can afford to buy the plant from them and run it themselves. What a novel idea.
I don't see her coming back.
Oh, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Here? Oh, there.
Sorry. It is getting cloudy over.
Yes.
I have terrible internet at home.
Okay, yes.
But I just caught the end of what Joel was saying as well.
Right. Okay, Anne, you have your hand up.
I'd be willing to go after Perry because I spoke before and this is his first time, so I'll go after Perry.
Perry, you have your hand up. I know that I asked you to go and help, but things seem to be going fine. Perry Colenval, she is actually has been vetted as a candidate for New Brunswick Southwest Greens, and we're waiting on the nomination process. So Perry, do you have a question?
It was more a comment based off what we were just saying. I think the other problem with why people are mostly upset with increasing taxes because you're not seeing the results from it. So I've lived abroad for quite some time and my parents pay a lot of taxes, but we see that coming back. If I went to university, it would have been completely free. My dental was free. Going in an ambulance is free. And all that is because you see where your taxes are going. So I find that maybe if we also had a better system in place that showed it, it wouldn't be as big of a problem as well.
Okay, Anne?
Definitely.
Yes, I was just wanting to comment on the idea of the regional, different rates for regional. And one thing I think it's important to remember is that in different regions, even though incomes may be lower and the GLI threshold would be lower, it often costs less to live. As a matter of fact, your fixed costs like housing, except maybe that's a bad example because that seems to be changing. But I mean, if indeed the cost of living is lower in another region, then to me, that seems fair to have the GLI lower, provided it still meets the threshold that people need to live. However, I agree with you, Jenica, and that is something that really has to be carefully discussed because there's always so many unintended consequences. And then the last point I wanted to make was about the message. And, I think the message, I think from what people have said, it's kind of come through loud and clear that depending on your audience, you have to pitch the idea of guaranteed livable income, pitch its merits in different ways because different groups of people value different things and, you have to address their values. But I think that everybody pretty much also loves a good story. So in addition to facts and figures, which are very important, if there's also stories of real people that bring these facts and figures to life, I think that can have a very powerful impact because human beings love stories. And we may pretend that we're driven by facts and figures and rationality, but we really aren't.
For sure. And it's those human stories again that get me so passionate about it. As I mentioned before, I don't know all the answers, I'm not an economist, but it feels right in my heart. And it's not something you hear a lot in politics and, but I don't have a problem saying that because it's really what it is. And it's when you have such difficult conversations day in and day out and you don't have answers, that those human stories, they'll certainly drive you to gain traction and to seek action. This is maybe a triggering conversation, but there's so much stress that our suicide rates are increasing. And in a lot of ways, it can be tied to financial stresses and financial burdens. If one person can be helped, then it's worth it, So those are very emotional kind of responses, but it's really the human side of it, and that's why this is so important.
So Jenica, I have a question in chat. What do we know of the current leaning of Canadians when it comes to UBI or GLI?
So good question. There's certainly lots of conversation happening social media wise. And with petitions, there's motion 46. I can't remember if it's like 50,000 signatures. It was huge. So there's a momentum. There's a movement happening.
Right.
And I think what's holding back, continued progress is maybe some of these questions that aren't fleshed out yet, right? It's not having some of those answers. So that's really the next step, is making it crystal clear what people are talking about here, what we might be opting into as a society. So that I think that will take it to the next level. But from what I'm seeing and hearing, again, just with colleagues in the House of Commons, is kind of a litmus test, is that this is having, broad support across the country.
So is there any polling been done on it?
Not that I've seen, but I'm sure there's something. I will have to look into that.
I think
I have lots of notes.
I think I've heard a number before, but I can't remember it. So Brandon Kirby.
Thanks. Jenica, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing the very best. I wasn't going to comment, even though you asked me to, but once my tax haven profession was slated, I have to chime in. I'm curious, what happens? Are there any discussions going on right now with respect to inflation concerns? So we see with the CERB, we see commodities going up: gold, silver, copper, iron, nickel. Lumber, especially. We see the impact on grocery bills. We see the impact on housing costs, as Alexander was saying. My concern is a lot of the people who are issuing the spending for this, the banks, their stocks are going to go up. The commodities traders, their funds are going to go up. The cryptocurrency traders, their funds are going to go up. But the average person is going to, yes, maybe get a little bit more in terms of a payment, but they're going to wind up paying higher prices at the grocery bill, or at the grocery store, I should say. So is this going to exacerbate the wealth gap? Now, Garth seemed to have a lot of his ducks in a row in terms of the numbers. If anybody wants to chime in on this, I'd love to hear some opinions, but is there anything being discussed in terms of mitigating the inflationary impacts of what this could bring about?
Yes, I don't know, Garth, if you wanted to respond.
Garth?
First of
I
all,
can go after.
there's absolutely no evidence that basic income will create inflation. Zero. No social program in the history of Canada has created inflation. There's no reason to believe this will. It will change a changing job market, but I've seen some studies that show they figure that it could change it by plus or minus 1%. That's in some actual research studies. So that might be a good number to quantify. I've never seen an economic analysis that says there'll be hyperinflation, and I've been trying to drag them out of people for at least 2 years now. So if there's something out there and you can provide it to me, I'd love to see it, but there's no study by a qualified economist that says that there'll be inflation. There's just lots of mythology on the internet. And if you can provide me the study, please do.
Yeah, my concern is what we saw in 2020 with grocery bills and with commodity prices and housing prices.
Mhm.
But there's no evidence that the basic income model will have anything to do with that.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. But with some of the basic income models, if you take a look at Finland, for example, they're operating on the backdrop of the euro, or Ontario, they're operating on the backdrop of CAD. So if all of Canada does this, we're not operating on the backdrop of anything.
But it's a separate problem from basic income. You're getting into a logical fallacy here. You're actually connecting to things that are unconnected. If we have a problem with our economy, it'll happen anyways, and the poor will have nothing, and so they'll still be worse off. So basic income isn't related to what you're saying. So I think we need to separate basic income from what's happening in our economy, which is, I believe, the fossil fuel economy is failing, and it's actually creating all this fluctuation. But let's not blame the poor, and let's not blame it basic income. I don't want to be blunt, but people want to connect these issues that are unconnectable, and we have to keep them separate. And I don't think there's any intrinsic inflationary effect in basic income. I'd love it if someone could provide me some evidence to show one way or the other, but I haven't seen it.
I agree with you on the fluctuating part of the fossil fuel economy. I think you're spot on. We've got to wean ourselves off. I'm just concerned about what all this spending has done to people's grocery bills over the last year.
Yeah, well, the lumber issue, I think, is completely separate. That is just because people are not spending their money. You know, there were people that were probably spending $100,000 a year on cruises, and they're now investing in their homes. It's a switch. And the same with grocery bills. People are spending more money at the grocery store and less money maybe in other countries. You know what I mean? It just changes their habits because they value food more, because they're at home more. So I think these things are pandemic related to changes. And I think some of these changes might happen when you introduce basic income, but they'll normalize. COVID hopefully won't normalize. We're going to shift back, but we still have this huge fluctuating fossil fuel industry that is on the downturn, and those big decisions with investors and with Shell in the Netherlands, those are going to have huge impacts in our economy. When, I don't know, but those things are probably going to affect our economy more than COVID would be my guess, because more rides on fossil fuels than COVID in terms of our economy.
If I could just jump in as well. So I mean, just to the kind of part of your point there, Brandon, there is conversation happening around inflation, around the spending that's been happening, around the deficit in Canada, absolutely. But I take Garth's point as well, as separating the two issues is really important, and a lot of these things are happening kind of anyway, and at no benefit to the average Canadian. And so I think it's worth it. I think it's just something that, you know, in COVID-19, a lot of lessons came out of it. And a lesson is that we need that ground floor, or else things are going to get worse, and it's going to cost us more. So that's the piece that I just think it's the human side of it. And it's kind of like the discussion around raising minimum wage is, you know, people will say, well, the prices will go up, and, you know, the prices go up anyways without any benefit to the worker. So sometimes we just have to be bold and do what's right. And so I certainly get your point, what you're saying. But just to say, we are talking about, or, you know, in Parliament as far as inflation and issues around the economy as well. But this is, I think, a separate issue.
Well, my concern is that it's not all that segregated just in the light of the collapse of the CAD versus certain metrics like CAD to gold or CAD to any commodities, it looks like there's an enormous wealth gap that's emerging from the increased government spending. And it's not necessarily all due to corporate welfare, although that is a huge problem. I totally
Yeah.
agree with that. I totally agree with the egregious spending to fossil fuels. Shouldn't be doing that. My concern is that, okay, so we want to put together a floor, but what if the floor doesn't actually amount to a whole lot in the light to shifting supply and demand curves? The reason why I say that it's not all that segregated is because a lot of the metrics are suggesting that the entire Canadian dollar is collapsing right now. So it's all across the spectrum. Anything that would use a Canadian dollar right now is not purchasing as much as it used to.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, there's lots to come out in the weeds here, and there's lots of conversations that still need to continue. We're very concerned about what's happening with Canadian currency, with what the forecast looks like for the future. But again, this is a risk I'm willing to take. And I just think that's what it comes down to.
You like to roll the dice.
Did we have another? Actually, we're kind of coming close to the end. If we had maybe one
yes,
more.
I think that's everybody. No, yes, everybody. There's no more hands up. Is there anyone else that would want to make a comment or a question?
So I'm just mentioning the taxing the super rich. Absolutely.
Yes.
There's lots in the works there as well, what we're
Yes.
advocating for. And there is support cross-partisan for that as well. And just, I mean, the comment around the budget, there were some things that were good, some things that were just too far down the line to really get excited about.
Right.
Investments in people are good. Right. But really this concept of, this middle class, I just think
Yes.
we're, as you said, Brandon, it's the wealth gap is huge. So what is this middle class? It seems like we were just, there's the super rich and then kind of the rest of Canada, and we need to address this now. It's shocking to think about what could be if we don't act, if we don't do something bold.
Yeah, as I say, we have the working poor. The working poor, they can't afford to live. And as I say, a basic income would go and give them bring their income up to where they can go and actually go out and pay their bills and spend money, which will improve the economy. Like what I'm see with a lot of politicians, they go and give these tax breaks to the wealthy, saying that, oh, this will trickle down. But as I say, with basic income, more people, there'll be a trickle up economy rather than a trickle down.
I see we've got Graham and Joel for comments as well.
Graham, okay.
Yeah.
We want to keep the conversation going.
Okay, well, I'm fully in favor of bringing the super rich tax rate back into the 70 percentiles. Back in the 50s and 60s, that was the case, and we had an extremely vibrant economy with a real middle class, which we don't have now.
Right.
That's vitally important. But also, we cannot forget the seniors who have to live on simply the government pensions. It is not enough. And the poverty is disgusting. Just as an example, I just had a macaroni and cheese box dinner because that's all I could afford.
Mm-hmm.
This is what's happening. So it's not good. I can't put gas in my car. I can't even change the tires on my car. Right? It's not good. So we have to deal with that.
Yeah, I know. I'm complained every winter when I see people who have their power shut off, and they're living without heat during the winter because they can't afford to pay their bills.
It's disgusting.
Yes. Joel, do you have a comment or a question? Joel, you're
Nope,
mute.
you're on mute, Joel.
Got to mute again, sorry. Yeah, no, I was just gonna.
Oh, excuse me.
It happened again.
Yes.
Unmute. You must have unmuted me at the same time.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, yeah, if people were able to invest in and buy more kind of local goods or keep things going like that, actually, if you had more expensive but locally grown or fresh types of food, it actually gives you more nutrition than the cheaper types of stuff that often people are forced to buy when they're poor. So there might be inflation, but your quality of life actually might be going up. So that's not necessarily a bad thing all the time. Economists are always going on about, oh, we want to stay away from inflation. Well, it all depends on whether that's actually improving our lives or not. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Anyway. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we should be calling it an end, as I think that's everybody. So I'd like to thank you for participating tonight and
Thank you.
taking part in this discussion. And I would, I'm just ending the